Hey guys, it's time to tell you a story. A story about how eventful this summer has been for me, and not just in a good way. How I couldn't keep up with the resolution that I had made to myself. And about this hashtag. It was the first weekend of May, late spring. Sid and I had been hiking up in the little Cottonwood Canyon. It was then that I took up this resolution to stop being a couch potato and make the most out of the upcoming summer. I wanted the weekends to be filled with something interesting. The next weekend I drove my car on an off-road trail and ended up spending a couple of hours that day clicking pictures. Well, at least that was something. The following weekend we drove south to the Zion National Park. With just a couple of hours of sleep in the car the previous night, we were not in our very best spirits. It also turned out to be a very sunny day. We were three overconfident guys with limited supplies and had not considered the fact that it was over 90 degrees that day. A little past halfway, I guess, I gave up. I thought it was wiser for me to head back down. Nature had taught me a lesson. But my friends, however, good for them. We camped that night and drove back the next morning. The following was a long weekend and we headed east this time, into the Rockies. It was a good trip. To keep it simple, spent some good time with an old friend, did some rafting for a good part of the day in the Colorado River, drove up to the Independence Pass. They were some of the best twisties that I have ever driven on. Met some very interesting people, explored the city of Denver and did a few more things that shall not be discussed here. On the last day of May, my sister travelled from Hyderabad to spend her summer holidays with me. As we rolled into June, things just got even better. 2 days after she landed, we were in the mountains and hiked up to the Donut Falls. The next day we drove north to the picturesque Bear Lake and almost crossed into Idaho. The following week, after a quick trip to Park City, we headed west into the monotony of the Nevada desert. The I-80, although it has some very interesting spots on the way, is still uninvolving and boring. We were supposed to drive straight for over 500 miles. The next exit we were supposed to take was only in California. By the time we reached our brother's place, it was well past midnight. It was a lazy start the next day. After getting some much needed rest and a good lunch, we headed further west, into San Francisco. This view of the Golden Gate Bridge never gets old. We saw some other noteworthy places that afternoon and headed south that night. Next afternoon, we were in the mecca of rock climbing, Yosemite. We spent some time relaxing by the river, set up camp, started a fire, grilled some chicken and contemplated the meaning of life. Well, not really. The next morning, we were in our hiking boots. We headed up the Mist Trail along the Merced River up to the Vernal Falls. We chose what was possibly the shortest hike to do, but the views were still amazing. She was a total sport and was loving it too. After spending a good part of the day in the valley, we headed back to Folsom that evening. Now it was time for us to head back east. There was one place, however, where we had to stop, Lake Tahoe. It looks incredible, both in size and its beauty. I just couldn't stop myself from taking the US 50 every time I drive east from Folsom. A few hours later, we were back on the monotonous I-80. But we came prepared this time. My sister binge-watched 2 movies and we reached home well past sunset. It was now time to take her to my most favorite national park, Zion. Over the weekend, we planned to do the 2 most complimenting hikes in Zion, Narrows and Angel's Landing. She couldn't be more excited. We spent few hours hiking into the Narrows. It wasn't too hot and the water wasn't cold either. I couldn't have asked for a better day to do this hike into the awe-inspiring canyons carved by the Virgin River. After having some unexpected guests stop by our tent the next morning, we were back in the canyons to hike up to the infamous Angel's Landing. It's not a very strenuous hike, but more importantly, it's said to be the most scariest hike in North America. You'll see why in a bit. We took our sweet little time to ascend to the summit. It had been my 4th time up here, and it's still worth it for the sense of accomplishment one gets after reaching the summit. She was stoked too. As I said, it's not the most strenuous one, and it's not these views that made the hike famous. It was the steel chains and 1,000-foot drops on each side that made the hike so infamous. By the time she got back to Scout's Lookout, she felt an immense sense of contentment. She also said that it had been such an amazing feeling that she wouldn't mind if she had to pack her bags and leave the next day back to India. She of course didn't leave. We already planned what we were supposed to do the next weekend. Drive north to witness the beauty of the world's first national park, Yellowstone. Having the continent's biggest supervolcano underneath the surface leads to some incredible geothermal features. We saw some of the mini springs and geysers that were present in the northern section of the park and headed back to camp. We grilled some corn and called it a day. The next morning we were in the eastern part of this 2 million acre park. Just when I thought things couldn't get any better, we bumped into this guy. I just couldn't have asked for more. With just a couple of hours of daytime left, we entered the Grand Teton National Park on the way home. Those mountains were captivating. They reminded me of Glacier National Park. Since we couldn't do much in the time we had, I had promised myself to be back this summer to explore more of this park. We started our drive back just as the sun was setting. After crossing 2 state borders, we got home a few hours past midnight. My sister's flight back to Hyderabad was on the 3rd, so we didn't intend the preceding weekend to be a hectic one. But how could she be in Utah and not see the delicate arch? So we headed into Moab late in the evening to do a night hike. It was a fairly easy hike, especially in the cooler part of the day. It was a clear night and the stars looked spectacular. We spent a few hours at the arch clicking pictures and spotting shooting stars. It was a short and sweet trip. My sister departed a couple of days later and I badly needed some rest. So did my car. Over the last 6 weeks, I drove over 8,000 miles on my car across 7 states. That was some insane mileage. In my opinion, a break was justified. The following 2 weekends were spent doing regular things that regular people do on a regular weekend. We also needed to recharge ourselves for an exhausting weekend ahead. We moved into a new apartment on the 21st. Just when I thought I could use the Pioneer Day holiday to unwind, I did something slightly stupid and had to be admitted to the emergency room. I had broken my ankle. I'm doing much better now though, but the recovery process was long and gruesome. My ankle was immobilized in a splint. 3 weeks later, I got a cast. I wasn't in my best spirit during those weeks. I just couldn't wait to have the cast off and be back on my feet again. Thanks to the ADA compliance of businesses here, I got to watch a lot of movies though. 4 more weeks later, the cast comes off and now I get a boot. I could get started on learning to walk again and work my muscles back to their previous glory. A week later, though I couldn't entirely walk yet, I could start driving again. It might seem a little counterintuitive, but trust me, that's how it worked for me. I was extremely glad I could be driving. I drove up into the mountains and fall was fast approaching. I was recovering fast and was back to doing regular stuff like movies and hanging out with friends over the weekend. All this time undergoing therapy to strengthen myself. Although with a heavy limp, I could start walking a couple of weeks later. It was almost the end of the summer and I badly needed a getaway before it got too cold. Almost 3 months after breaking my ankle, I was back in my true spirits and we drove to Capitol Reef National Park with a lot of help coming from Sid. I couldn't do much hiking yet, but being back in the wilderness felt immensely satisfying. The second half of summer has been very mundane and far from interesting, but I guess there wasn't much I could do. Now when I look back, I wonder what a summer it has been. And now I guess it's time for... Cheers!